Have you ever, needed to get your head around a really complex system super quickly? One that just feels like it's got a million hidden parts. Well, today, that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking a deep dive into the intricate, sometimes really confusing world of U.S. work visas. Our mission here is basically to unpack all this source material. We've gathered some really compelling articles, fascinating transcripts, detailed research. I want to pull back the curtain on the surprising facts, the hidden mechanisms, and honestly, some pretty dramatic recent shifts in the U.S. work visa system. And this isn't just, dry immigration policy. It's about giving you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on something that touches everything from, like, the biggest tech companies down to small-town America.
Yeah, and it's really important to get that what seems maybe straightforward on the surface. It's actually a super complex landscape, and one that's unfortunately kind of full of ways people try to cheat the system and exploit workers. It's a system that badly needs reform, maybe even, expansion.
Oh, definitely. And trust me, our sources have some, let's say, spicy elements. We're talking about things like the public spat between Elon Musk and traditional MAGA groups over H-1B visas, or this really shocking story about an American worker basically training their own replacement without even knowing it. And we'll also get into how this new America First policy is shaking up visa approvals right now. Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah.
So when people talk about work visas, especially, for skilled jobs, the H-1B often comes up first. For a lot of folks, it's seen as maybe the main path to working in the U.S.
Right. And its origin story is key here. It was created back in 1990. The idea was really specific: attract the best and brightest for high-skilled jobs, especially in tech, which was booming then. The thinking was we didn't have enough homegrown talent for those specific roles.
Okay, so if that was the idea in 1990, how come it hasn't really changed much? I mean, the economy is completely different now. That feels like a big disconnect.
It absolutely is. And you see that disconnect in the numbers today. Something like close to 80% of H-1B petitions are now for workers from India, and there's a reason for that. India's economy is heavily built around services, software engineering, exactly the skills U.S. companies often look for. Plus, culturally, there's often this ingrained focus on STEM fields, strong math skills, right from an early age.
And the demand is just, wow. Over 450,000 people registered for the H-1B lottery last year, but there are only 85,000 slots. That's an incredibly low chance of getting picked. People often need, like 3 tries? We heard from one person anonymously who said it felt unreal when they finally got picked on their last attempt. They knew it was just pure luck.
And here's a really critical detail, kind of one of those hidden mechanisms. The visa itself, it's owned by the employer, not the employee. They call the employee the beneficiary. This gives the company enormous control, like extraordinary control over whether that person can stay and work here. It creates a huge power imbalance.
Right, so you've got huge demand, this employer control.
Yeah.
It kind of makes sense that people would try to game the system. And our sources show that starting around 2023, lottery entries just exploded.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these staffing companies figured out they could submit the same person's name over and over again. There was one crazy case 80 times for the same person. They found like 3,000 IT staffing firms were doing this.
And their whole business model kind of drives this. They hire folks in India, pay them lower salaries, then place them with U.S. clients. It essentially becomes this massive labor arbitrage scheme. It helps big corporations make more profit. But the surprising fallout, as the sources point out, is that it can end up undermining, local labor markets in the process.
So USCIS, that's the immigration agency, they cracked down in 2024. They changed the lottery to select based on unique individuals, not just unique registrations, trying to stop that multiple entry trick.
Yeah, but even with that crackdown, the big multinational outsourcing firms, they're still finding ways, legal loopholes really, to kind of flood the lottery. And they're not always bringing in the absolute best and brightest. Often it's lower salary workers, which, again, increases that risk of undercutting American wages. And, pretty much every Fortune 500 company in the U.S. uses these outsourcing services. It's baked into how corporations operate now.
And this isn't just abstract. It hits real people, real communities. Take this story from Harley-Davidson in Tomahawk, Wisconsin. It's a small town. Everyone knows each other. There was this American guy, a local, hired by Infosys, one of those big outsourcing firms, as an IT contractor at Harley. Loved the job. Good jobs are scarce up there. Then, in 2013, Infosys gets an H-1B visa for one of their employees based in India, and they assign him to Harley. So the American contractor is asked to train this new guy, help him find an apartment, get settled. He genuinely thought, okay, cool, new team member. But in his words, they did not really tell me that I was training my replacement. And then boom, 2 weeks notice. And just the detail that sticks with you. The Infosys contractor needed to get between the two Harley plants 3 miles apart. He ended up riding a bike through the Wisconsin snow. Wow. Okay,
Mhm.
so that's H-1B. But beyond that, our sources point to another visa type being gamed, the L-1 visa. This one's supposed to be for like managers or executives transferring within the same multinational company, right?
Exactly. And the key differences are why it's so, let's say, tempting to misuse. Unlike the H-1B, the L-1 doesn't have a minimum salary requirement. And this is huge. There's no annual limit, no cap on how many L-1s can be issued each year. That makes it wide open.
We've got a story that really shows this. Anil Kini, he was an Indian immigrant, worked for TCS, another giant outsourcing firm. He got an L1A visa, which is specifically for managers, and got assigned to a Western Union project in Denver.
Right. And what Kinney found there really exposes the system. He quickly saw there were associates who were not performing the roles which their visas were approved for.
Hmm.
I mean, he basically said, how can you have 22 managers on an account that only has maybe 150, 200 people total? It just didn't add up. So he asked his own manager about it, like, what's going on here? And the response he got back was basically, don't get involved. Don't get your hands dirty.
Chilling. So Kiti essentially becomes a whistleblower. When the Trump administration started in 2017, his company expected way more audits. He described this call in January, where a senior manager basically told him to fudge the records, make things look compliant for the audits. Kiti refused. He wouldn't prove visas he knew weren't right, and what happened? He got fired from TCS.
And the data backs this up. It raises questions. TCS is part of the Tata Group. I mean, it's like the equivalent of maybe our biggest tech giants here, a huge company in India. They've gotten 5 times as many of these L1A manager visas as their closest rivals, like Cognizant or Infosys, even though they all have roughly the same number of employees here in the U.S. So you have to ask, why does one company need 5 times more managers for a similar workforce? That lack of a salary floor and no annual cap on the L1, it's clearly a massive incentive.
Okay, so stepping back a bit from H-1B and L-1, let's talk about the broader picture and some really big policy changes happening right now. I mean, there are tons of U.S. visa types, right? Over 185 categories. But they mostly fall into 2 big buckets. Non-immigrant for temporary stays like tourist visas, B1, B2, student visas, F1, and H1B, L1 we've discussed.
Yeah.
And then immigrant visas for permanent residents like family-based ones or the employment-based ones, EB1 through EB5.
Exactly. And what's really critical to understand right now, as of, say, July 2025, are the major policy shifts under the current Trump administration. There's this overarching policy called the America First policy. It sounds general, but the sources say it now affects literally every single decision made by every single immigration officer at every consulate around the world.
Wow. And what does that mean in practice? Well, the big takeaway is a visa is now explicitly treated as a privilege, absolutely not a right. Officers can deny visas or even cancel existing ones if they think an applicant is acting against U.S. policy or somehow undermining the administration or even just saying negative things about the administration online. Yeah, social media posts can be grounds for denial. The sources even mentioned Bruce Springsteen. Apparently, after he made some critical comments abroad, the government issued a warning hinting his reentry could be affected. Just shows how wide-ranging this policy can be.
And it's not just policy. There are new costs, too. There's a new $250 visa integrity fee. This applies to most applicants now, H-1B, L-1, O-1, even students and business travelers from countries that aren't in the visa waiver program. The stated goal is to discourage people from overstaying their visas and to help fund border security. It's supposed to be refundable if you follow all the visa rules and leave on time. But, and this is key, if you try to adjust your status to get a green card while you're already in the U.S., you lose that $250. It's a clear financial nudge against applying for permanent residency from within the country.
Okay, and beyond fees, there are actual bans and restrictions for people from certain countries.
Right.
Yeah, completely suspended for 12 countries. Think Afghanistan, Iran, Somalia, Yemen. That means basically no tourist visas, no student visas, no immigrant visas at all for their citizens. Then there are partial restrictions for 7 other countries like Cuba and Venezuela. People from there might still get visas like H-1B or L-1, but expect much longer waits and higher chances of denial.
hmm And then there are these really specific, almost surgical restrictions. There's something being called the Harvard ban, a targeted executive order suspending new student and scholar visas, FMJ types, just for Harvard. Plus, there's increased scrutiny on Chinese student visas, especially if they're studying in fields deemed critical, like AI, advanced computing, biotech, or if they're suspected of having ties to the Chinese Communist Party.
What about the process itself? Any changes there?
Well, they're apparently trying to standardize visa processing across different embassies, make it more consistent. There was that pilot program for renewing visas inside the U.S., which got paused. But now there's a bill trying to bring that back and expand it, which could be a big deal. Though, on the other hand, there are ongoing efforts to implement more travel bans and just generally increase vetting for everyone. And one more thing on students. There's a new policy for revoking student visas. If new information comes up after the visa is issued, maybe something on social media, or they find out the student stopped going to classes or committed a crime, the State Department can revoke the visa remotely. Just send an email to the address used on the application form, the DS-160. Now, whether the person is actually considered out of status within the U.S., that decision still rests with USCIS, the agency here.
Okay, got it. And quickly, for anyone dealing with the National Visa Center, the NVC, any advice from the sources?
Yeah.
Seems the main way to communicate is through their online public inquiry form. And the crucial thing is, submit all your documents together at the same time. If you send things piecemeal, expect major delays.
Right. This practical stuff leads us back to the bigger picture, doesn't it? What does all this mean, the H-1B and L-1 gaming, these huge policy shifts? What does it mean for, like, U.S. innovation, attracting talent? Well, when you connect those dots, the picture gets pretty stark. Immigrants are a massive part of the workforce in Silicon Valley, for instance. So any move to seriously cut back on the programs that let them come here, that's seen as a direct threat to the whole U.S. tech industry.
And that raises the whole brain drain concern, right?
Yeah.
Our sources mentioned that founders, entrepreneurs, they're more likely to start companies in places that actually have a dedicated startup visa, which the U.S. still doesn't. Plus, you look at the projections, the U.S. needs millions more engineers and developers in the coming years, and something like 60% of our PhD grads in AI are immigrants. We need that talent.
And it loops back to that cultural point we touched on earlier about math skills being core. Many immigrants, particularly from India, do well in engineering, partly because those quantitative skills are emphasized so strongly from a young age.
The personal impact is huge, too. Remember that anonymous H-1B applicant we mentioned? They basically said they couldn't even think about starting a tech company here under their current visa situation. They were totally prepared mentally just to pack up and go back home if the visa didn't work out.
Yeah. And when you boil it down, the reason this whole system is so entrenched, so hard to fix, it really comes down to the fact that the end clients, the big corporations, they're making serious money from it. And then you have the middlemen, those IT staffing companies, who've just figured out how to exploit the whole setup for their own profit.
It's fascinating how it creates these weird political dynamics, too. Like we mentioned earlier with Elon Musk. Here's someone who appeals to a certain conservative base, but he's out there publicly pushing for more H-1B visas, which puts him completely at odds with some hardline America First folks. It just shows how tangled up the economic interests are in all this. But there does seem to be this general feeling across the board, really, that the program desperately needs reform.
Right. Which brings us to the fundamental question, the real heart of the matter for these visas. Can U.S. policymakers actually change the system to make it fairer for workers, wherever they're from? Or are the powerful corporate interests just going to fight to keep the status quo because it lowers their labor costs and boosts their profits? People have proposed reforms like just raising the annual cap on H-1Bs and maybe tying it to economic growth so you don't have this fight every few years or, every 3 decades like it's been.
So we've really covered a lot of ground here. We've gone through the tangled web of H-1B and L-1 visas, looked at these sweeping America First policy changes, and tried to untangle that knot of economic needs, individual dreams, and corporate power. It's definitely a lot to take in, but it really paints a picture of a system that feels like it's at a major turning point.
And maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. Given how vital immigration clearly is for U.S. innovation and economic strength, what's the real long-term cost if the system keeps prioritizing corporate bottom lines over, say, fair competition and attracting the best, most diverse talent from around the world? What does all this do to how the world sees the U.S. as a land of opportunity? And what knock-on effects might that have on America's place in the global race for innovation?
Definitely something to think about. Take a moment and consider what really stood out to you from this deep dive. How might this more nuanced view change how you think about things like a potential startup visa or this whole debate about tying visa numbers to the economy?